The Lodger by Marie Belloc Lowndes. Chapter 17. Mrs. Bunting slept well the night following that during which the lodger had been engaged in making his mysterious experiments in her kitchen. She was so tired, so utterly exhausted, that sleep came to her the moment she laid her head upon her pillow. Perhaps that was why she rose so early the next morning. Hardly giving herself time to swallow the tea Bunting had made and brought her, she got up and dressed. She had suddenly come to the conclusion that the hall and staircase required a thorough doing down, and she did not even wait till they had eaten their breakfast before beginning her labors. It made Bunting feel quite uncomfortable. As he sat by the fire reading his morning paper, the paper which was again of such absorbing interest, he called out, "There's no need for so much hurry, Ellen. Daisy'll be back today. Why don't you wait till she's come home to help you?" But from the hall, where she was busy dusting, sweeping, polishing, his wife's voice came back. "Girls ain't no good at this sort of work. Don't you worry about me. I feel as if I'd enjoy doing an extra bit of cleaning today. I don't like to feel as anyone could come in and see my place dirty." "No fear of that," Bunting chuckled, and then a new thought struck him. "Ain't you afraid of waking the lodger?" he called out. "Mr. Sleuth slept most of yesterday and all last night," she answered quickly. "As it is, I study him over much. It's a long, long time since I've done this staircase down." All the time she was engaged in doing the hall, Mrs. Bunting left the sitting-room door wide open. That was a queer thing of her to do, but Bunting didn't like to get up and shut her out, as it were. Still, try as he would, he couldn't read with any comfort while all that noise was going on. He had never known Ellen make such a lot of noise before. Once or twice he looked up and frowned rather crossly. There came a sudden silence, and he was startled to see that Ellen was standing in the doorway, staring at him, doing nothing. "Come in," he said. "Do. Ain't you finished yet?" "I was only resting a minute," she said. "You don't tell me nothing. I'd like to know if there's anything new in the paper this morning." She spoke in a muffled voice, almost as if she were ashamed of her unusual curiosity, and her look of fatigue, of pallor, made Bunting suddenly uneasy. "Come in, do," he repeated sharply. "You've done quite enough, and before breakfast, too. 'Tain't necessary. Come in and shut that door." He spoke authoritatively, and his wife, for a wonder, obeyed him. She came in and did what she had never done before, brought the broom with her and put it up against the wall in the corner. Then she sat down. I'll make breakfast up here," she said. I feel cold, Bunting." And her husband stared at her surprised, for drops of perspiration were glistening on her forehead. He got up. "All right, I'll go down and bring the eggs up. Don't you worry. For the matter of that, I can cook them downstairs if you like." "No," she said obstinately. "I'd rather do my own work. You just bring them up here. That'll be all right. Tomorrow morning we'll have Daisy to help see to things." "Come over here and sit down comfortable in my chair," he suggested kindly. "You never do take any bit of rest, Ellen. I never seed such a woman." And again she got up and meekly obeyed him, walking across the room with languid steps. He watched her, anxiously, uncomfortably. She took up the newspaper he had just laid down, and Bunting took 2 steps towards her. "I'll show you the most interesting bit," he said eagerly. "It's the piece headed, 'Our Special Investigator.' You see, they've started a special investigator of their own, and he's got hold of a lot of little facts the police seem to have overlooked. The man who writes all that, the special investigator, was a famous tech in his time, and he's just come back out of his retirement a purpose to do this bit of work for the paper. You read what he says. I shouldn't be a bit surprised if he ends by getting that reward. One can see he just loves the work of tracking people down." "There's nothing to be proud of in such a job," said his wife listlessly. "He'll have something to be proud of if he catches the Avenger," cried Bunting. He was too keen about this affair to be put off by Ellen's contradictory remarks. "You just noticed that bit about the rubber soles. Now no one's thought of that. I'll just tell Chandler. He don't seem to me to be half awake, that young man don't. He's quite wide awake enough without you saying things to him. How about those eggs, Bunting? I feel quite ready for my breakfast, even if you don't." Mrs. Bunting now spoke in what her husband sometimes secretly described to himself as Ellen's snarling voice. He turned away and left the room, feeling oddly troubled. There was something queer about her, and he couldn't make it out. He didn't mind it when she spoke sharply and nastily to him. He was used to that. But now she was so up and down, so different from what she used to be. In old days she had always been the same, but now a man never knew where to have her. And as he went downstairs he pondered uneasily over his wife's changed ways and manner. Take the question of his easy-chair. A very small matter, no doubt, but he had never known Ellen sit in that chair. No, not even once, for a minute, since it had been purchased by her as a present for him. They had been so happy and so restful during that first week after Mr. Sleuth had come to them. Perhaps it was the sudden dramatic change from agonizing anxiety to peace and security which had been too much for Ellen. Yes, that was what was the matter with her. That and the universal excitement about these Avenger murders, which were shaking the nerves of all London. Even Bunting, unobservant as he was, had come to realize that his wife took a morbid interest in these terrible happenings. And it was the more queer of her to do so that at first she refused to discuss them, and said openly that she was utterly uninterested in murder or crime of any sort. He, Bunting, had always had a mild pleasure in such things. In his time he had been a great reader of detective tales, and even now he thought there was no pleasanter reading. It was that which had first drawn him to Joe Chandler, and made him welcome the young chap as cordially as he had done when they first came to London. But though Ellen had tolerated, she had never encouraged that sort of talk between the two men. More than once she had exclaimed reproachfully, "To hear you two, one would think there was no nice, respectable, quiet people left in the world." But now all that was changed. She was as keen as anyone could be to hear the latest details of an Avenger crime. True, she took her own view of any theory suggested, but there, Ellen always had her own notions about everything under the sun. Ellen was a woman who thought for herself, a clever woman, not an everyday woman by any manner of means. While these thoughts were going disconnectedly through his mind, Bunting was breaking 4 eggs into a basin. He was going to give Ellen a nice little surprise, to cook an omelet as a French chef had once taught him to do years and years ago. He didn't know how she would take his doing such a thing after what she had said, but never mind, she would enjoy the omelet when done. Ellen hadn't been eating her food properly of late, and when he went up again, his wife, to his relief, and it must be admitted to his surprise, took it very well. She had not even noticed how long he had been downstairs, for she had been reading with intense, painful care the column that the great daily paper they took in had allotted to the one-time famous detective. According to the special investigator's own account, he had discovered all sorts of things that had escaped the eye of the police and of the official detectives. For instance, owing, he admitted, to a fortunate chance, he had been at the place where the last 2 murders had been committed very soon after the double crime had been discovered. In fact, within half an hour, and he had found, or so he felt sure, on the slippery wet pavement imprints of the murderer's right foot. The paper reproduced the impression of a half-worn rubber sole. At the same time, he also admitted, for the special investigator was very honest, and he had a good bit of space to fill on the enterprising paper which had engaged him to probe the awful mystery, that there were thousands of rubber soles being worn in London. And when she came to that statement, Mrs. Bunting looked up, and there came a wan smile over her thin, closely shut lips. It was quite true, that about rubber soles. There were thousands of rubber soles being worn just now. She felt grateful to the special investigator for having stated the fact so clearly. The column ended up with the words, "And today will take place the inquest on the double crime of 10 days ago. To my mind, it would be well if a preliminary public inquiry could be held at once, say on the very day the discovery of a fresh murder is made. In that way alone would it be possible to weigh and sift the evidence offered by members of the general public. For when a week or more has elapsed, and these same people have been examined and cross-examined in private by the police, their impressions have had time to become blurred and hopelessly confused. On that last occasion but one there seems no doubt that several people, at any rate 2 women and 1 man, actually saw the murderer hurrying from the scene of his atrocious double crime. This being so, today's investigation may be of the highest value and importance. Tomorrow I hope to give an account of the impression made on me by the inquest, and by any statements made during its course." Even when her husband had come in with the tray, Mrs. Bunting had gone on reading, only lifting up her eyes for a moment. At last he said rather crossly, "Put down that paper, Ellen, this minute. The omelet I've cooked for you will be just like leather if you don't eat it." But once his wife had eaten her breakfast, and to Bunting's mortification, she left more than half the nice omelet untouched, she took the paper up again. She turned over the big sheets until she found, at the foot of one of the 10 columns devoted to the Avenger and his crimes, the information she wanted, and then uttered an exclamation under her breath. What Mrs. Bunting had been looking for, what at last she had found, was the time and place of the inquest which was to be held that day. The hour named was a rather odd time, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but from Mrs. Bunting's point of view it was most convenient. By 2 o'clock, nay, by 1:30, the lodger would have had his lunch. By hurrying matters a little she and Bunting would have had their dinner, and Daisy wasn't coming home till tea time. She got up out of her husband's chair. "I think you're right," she said in a quick, hoarse tone. "I mean about me seeing a doctor, Bunting. I think I will go and see a doctor this very afternoon." "Wouldn't you like me to go with you?" he asked. "No, that I wouldn't. In fact, I wouldn't go at all. You was to go with me." "All right," he said vexedly. "Please yourself, my dear. You know best." "I should think I did know best where my own health is concerned." Even Bunting was incensed by this lack of gratitude. "'Twas I said long ago you ought to go and see the doctor. 'Twas you said you wouldn't," he exclaimed pugnaciously. "Well, I've never said you was never right, have I? At any rate, I'm going." "Have you a pain anywhere?" He stared at her with a look of real solicitude on his fat, phlegmatic face. Somehow Ellen didn't look right, standing there opposite him. Her shoulders seemed to have shrunk, even her cheeks had fallen in a little. She had never looked so bad, not even when they had been half starving and dreadfully, dreadfully worked. "Yes," she said briefly, "I've a pain in my head at the back of my neck. It doesn't often leave me. It gets worse when anything upsets me, like I was upset last night by Joe Chandler." "He was a silly ass to come and do a thing like that," said Bunting crossly. "I'd a good mind to tell him so, too. But I must say, Ellen, I wonder he took you in. He didn't me." "Well, you had no chance he should. You knew who it was," she said slowly. And Bunting remained silent, for Ellen was right. Joe Chandler had already spoken when he, Bunting, came out into the hall and saw their cleverly disguised visitor. "Those big black mustaches," he went on complainingly, "and that black wig, why, 'twas too ridiculous, that's what I call it." "Not to anyone who didn't know Joe," she said sharply. "Well, I don't know. He didn't look like a real man, nohow. If he's a wise lad, he won't let our Daisy ever see him looking like that." And Bunting laughed, a comfortable laugh. He had thought a good deal about Daisy and young Chandler the last 2 days, and on the whole he was well pleased. It was a dull, unnatural life the girl was leading with old Aunt, and Joe was earning good money. They wouldn't have long to wait, these 2 young people, as a beau and his girl often have to wait, as he, Bunting, and Daisy's mother had had to do for ever so long before they could be married. No, there was no reason why they shouldn't be spliced quite soon, if so the fancy took them. And Bunting had very little doubt that so the fancy would take Joe, at any rate. But there was plenty of time. Daisy wouldn't be 18 till the week after next. They might wait till she was 20. By that time old Aunt might be dead, and Daisy might have come into quite a tidy little bit of money. "What are you smiling at?" said his wife sharply. And he shook himself. "I? Smiling? At nothing that I knows of." Then he waited a moment. "Well, if you will know, Ellen, I was just thinking of Daisy and that young chap Joe Chandler. He has gone on her, ain't he?" "Gone?" And then Mrs. Bunting laughed, a queer, odd, not unkindly laugh. "Gone, Bunting?" she repeated. "Why, he's out of sight. Right out of sight." Then hesitatingly, and looking narrowly at her husband, she went on, twisting a bit of her black apron with her fingers as she spoke. "I suppose he'll be going over this afternoon to fetch her? Or do you think he'll have to be at that inquest, Bunting?" "Inquest? What inquest?" He looked at her puzzled. "Why, the inquest on them bodies found in the passage nearby King's Cross." "Oh, no, he'd have no call to be at the inquest. For the matter of that, I know he's going over to fetch Daisy. He said so last night, just when you went up to the lodger." "That's just as well." Mrs. Bunting spoke with considerable satisfaction. "Otherwise I suppose you'd have had to go. I wouldn't like the house left, not with us out of it. Mr. Sleuth would be upset if there came a ring at the door. Oh, I won't leave the house, don't you be afraid, Ellen. Not while you're out. Not even if I'm out a good while, Bunting. No fear. Of course you'll be a long time if it's your idea to see that doctor at Ealing. He looked at her questioningly, and Mrs. Bunting nodded. Somehow nodding didn't seem as bad as speaking a lie. End of chapter 17. Recording by Leanne Howlett. The Lodger by Marie Belloc Lowndes. Chapter 18. Any ordeal is far less terrifying, far easier to meet with courage when it is repeated, than is even a milder experience which is entirely novel. Mrs. Bunting had already attended an inquest in the character of a witness, and it was one of the few happenings of her life which was sharply etched against the somewhat blurred screen of her memory. In a country house where the then Ellen Green had been staying for a fortnight with her elderly mistress, there had occurred one of those sudden, pitiful tragedies which occasionally destroy the serenity, the apparent decorum of a large, respectable household. The under-housemaid, a pretty, happy-natured girl, had drowned herself for love of the footman, who had given his sweetheart cause for bitter jealousy. The girl had chosen to speak of her troubles to the strange lady's maid rather than to her own fellow servants, and it was during the conversation the two women had had together that the girl had threatened to take her own life. As Mrs. Bunting put on her outdoor clothes, preparatory to going out, she recalled very clearly all the details of that dreadful affair, and of the part she herself had unwillingly played in it. She visualized the country inn where the inquest on that poor, unfortunate creature had been held. The butler had escorted her from the hall, for he also was to give evidence, and as they came up there had been a look of cheerful animation about the inn yard. People coming and going, many women as well as men, village folk, among whom the dead girl's fate had aroused a great deal of interest, and the kind of horror which those who live on a dull countryside welcome rather than avoid. Everyone there had been particularly nice and polite to her, to Ellen Green. There had been a time of waiting in a room upstairs in the old inn, and the witnesses had been accommodated, not only with chairs, but with cake and wine. She remembered how she had dreaded being a witness, how she had felt as if she would like to run away from her nice, easy place, rather than have to get up and tell the little that she knew of the sad business. But it had not been so very dreadful after all. The coroner had been a kindly spoken gentleman. In fact, he had complimented her on the clear, sensible way she had given her evidence concerning the exact words the unhappy girl had used. One thing Ellen Green had said, in answer to a question put by an inquisitive juryman, had raised a laugh in the crowded, low-ceilinged room. Ought not Miss Ellen Green, so the man had asked, to have told someone of the girl's threat? If she had done so, might not the girl have been prevented from throwing herself into the lake? And she, the witness, had answered, with some asperity, for by that time the coroner's kind manner had put her at her ease, that she had not attached any importance to what the girl had threatened to do, never believing that any young woman could be so silly as to drown herself for love. Vaguely Mrs. Bunting supposed that the inquest at which she was going to be present this afternoon would be like that country inquest of long ago. It had been no mere perfunctory inquiry. She remembered very well how little by little that pleasant-spoken gentleman, the coroner, had got the whole truth out. The story, that is, of how that horrid footman, whom she, Ellen Green, had disliked from the first minute she had set eyes on him, had taken up with another young woman. It had been supposed that this fact would not be elicited by the coroner, but it had been, quietly, remorselessly. More, the dead girl's letters had been read out. Piteous, queerly expressed letters, full of wild love and bitter, threatening jealousy, and the jury had censured the young man most severely. She remembered the look on his face when the people, shrinking back, had made a passage for him to slink out of the crowded room. Come to think of it now, it was strange she had never told Bunting that long-ago tale. It had occurred years before she knew him, and somehow nothing had ever happened to make her tell him about it. She wondered whether Bunting had ever been to an inquest. She longed to ask him, but if she asked him now, this minute, he might guess where she was thinking of going. And then, while still moving about her bedroom, she shook her head. No, no, Bunting would never guess such a thing. He would never suspect her of telling him a lie. Stop. Had she told a lie? She did mean to go to the doctor after the inquest was finished, if there was time, that is. She wondered uneasily how long such an inquiry was likely to last. In this case, as so very little had been discovered, the proceedings would surely be very formal and therefore short. She herself had one quite definite object, that of hearing the evidence of those who believed they had seen the murderer leaving the spot where his victims lay weltering in their still flowing blood. She was filled with a painful, secret, and yes, eager curiosity to hear how those who were so positive about the matter would describe the appearance of the avenger. After all, a lot of people must have seen him, for as Bunting had said only the day before to young Chandler, the avenger was not a ghost. He was a living man with some kind of hiding place where he was known, and where he spent his time between his awful crimes. As she came back to the sitting-room, her extreme pallor struck her husband. "Why, Ellen," he said, "it is time you went to the doctor. You looks just as if you was going to a funeral. I'll come along with you as far as the station. You're going by train, ain't you? Not by bus, eh? It's a very long way to Ealing, you know." There you go, breaking your solemn promise to me the very first minute. But somehow she did not speak unkindly, only fretfully and sadly, and Bunting hung his head. "Why, to be sure, I'd gone and clean forgot the lodger. But will you be all right, Ellen? Why not wait till tomorrow and take Daisy with you?" "I like doing my own business in my own way and not in someone else's way," she snapped out, and then more gently, for Bunting really looked concerned, and she did feel very far from well, "I'll be all right, old man. Don't you worry about me." As she turned to go across to the door, she drew the black shawl she had put over her long jacket more closely round her. She felt ashamed, deeply ashamed of deceiving so kind a husband. And yet what could she do? How could she share her dreadful burden with poor Bunting? Why, 'twould be enough to make a man go daft. Even she often felt as if she could stand it no longer, as if she would give the world to tell someone, anyone, what it was that she suspected, what deep in her heart she so feared to be the truth. But unknown to herself, the fresh outside air, fog-laden though it was, soon began to do her good. She had gone out far too little the last few days, for she had had a nervous terror of leaving the house unprotected, as also a great unwillingness to allow Bunting to come into contact with the lodger. When she reached the underground station, she stopped short. There were two ways of getting to St. Pancras. She could go by bus or she could go by train. She decided on the latter. But before turning into the station, her eyes strayed over the bills of the early afternoon papers lying on the ground. Two words, "The Avenger," stared up at her in varying type. Drawing her black shawl yet a little closer about her shoulders, Mrs. Bunting looked down at the placards. She did not feel inclined to buy a paper, as many of the people round her were doing. Her eyes were smarting even now from their unaccustomed following of the close print in the paper Bunting took in. Slowly she turned, at last, into the underground station. And now a piece of extraordinary good fortune befell Mrs. Bunting. The third-class carriage in which she took her place happened to be empty, save for the presence of a police inspector. And once they were well away, she summoned up courage and asked him the question she knew she would have to ask of someone within the next few minutes. "Can you tell me," she said in a low voice, "where death inquests are held?" She moistened her lips, waited a moment, and then concluded, "In the neighborhood of King's Cross." The man turned and looked at her attentively. She did not look at all the sort of Londoner who goes to an inquest, there are many such, just for the fun of the thing. Approvingly, for he was a widower, he noted her neat black coat and skirt, and the plain princess bonnet which framed her pale, refined face. "I'm going to the coroner's court myself," he said good-naturedly, "so you can come along with me. You see, there's that big Avenger inquest going on today, so I think they'll have had to make other arrangements for, ordinary cases." And as she looked at him dumbly, he went on, "There'll be a mighty crowd of people at the Avenger inquest, a lot of ticket folk to be accommodated, to say nothing of the public." "That's the inquest I'm going to," faltered Mrs. Bunting. She could scarcely get the words out. She realized with acute discomfort, yes, and shame, how strange, how untoward was that which she was going to do. Fancy a respectable woman wanting to attend a murder inquest. During the last few days, all her perceptions had become sharpened by suspense and fear. She realized now, as she looked into the stolid face of her unknown friend, how she herself would have regarded any woman who wanted to attend such an inquiry from a simple, morbid feeling of curiosity. And yet that was just what she was about to do herself. "I've got a reason for wanting to go there," she murmured. It was a comfort to unburden herself this little way even to a stranger. "Ah," he said reflectively, a relative connected with one of the two victims' husbands, I presume?" And Mrs. Bunting bent her head. "Going to give evidence?" he asked casually, and then he turned and looked at Mrs. Bunting with far more attention than he had yet done. "Oh, no!" There was a world of horror, of fear in the speaker's voice, and the inspector felt concerned and sorry. Hadn't seen her for quite a long time, I suppose. Never had seen her. "I'm from the country." Something impelled Mrs. Bunting to say these words, but she hastily corrected herself. "At least I was. Will he be there?" She looked at him dumbly, not in the least knowing to whom he was alluding. "I mean the husband," went on the inspector hastily. "I felt sorry for the last poor chap. I mean the husband of the last one. He seemed so awfully miserable. You see, she'd been a good wife and a good mother till she took to the drink." "It always is so," breathed out Mrs. Bunting. "Aye." He waited a moment. "Do you know anything about the court?" he asked. She shook her head. "Well, don't you worry. I'll take you in along o' me. You'd never get in by yourself." They got out, and oh, the comfort of being in someone's charge, of having a determined man in uniform to look after one. And yet even now there was to Mrs. Bunting something dreamlike, unsubstantial about the whole business. "If he knew, if he only knew what I know," she kept saying over and over again to herself as she walked lightly by the big, burly form of the police inspector. "'Tisn't far, not 3 minutes," he said suddenly. "Am I walking too quick for you, ma'am?" "No, not at all. I'm a quick walker." And then suddenly they turned a corner and came on a mass of people, a densely packed crowd of men and women, staring at a mean-looking little door sunk into a high wall. "Better take my arm," the inspector suggested. "Make way there, make way," he cried authoritatively, and he swept her through the serried ranks which parted at the sound of his voice, at the sight of his uniform. "Lucky you met me," he said, smiling. "You'd never have got through alone, and 'tain't a nice crowd, not by any manner of means." The small door opened just a little way, and they found themselves on a narrow stone-flagged path leading into a square yard. A few men were out there, smoking. Before preceding her into the building which rose at the back of the yard, Mrs. Bunting's kind new friend took out his watch. "There's another 20 minutes before they'll begin," he said. "There's the mortuary." He pointed with his thumb to a low room built out to the right of the court. "Would you like to go in and see them?" he whispered. "Oh, no!" she cried in a tone of extreme horror, and he looked down at her with sympathy and with increased respect. She was a nice, respectable woman, she was. She had not come here imbued with any morbid, horrible curiosity, but because she thought it her duty to do so. He suspected her of being sister-in-law to one of the Avenger's victims. They walked through into a big room or hall, now full of men talking in subdued yet eager, animated tones. "I think you'd better sit down here," he said considerately, and leading her to one of the benches that stood out from the whitewashed walls, "unless you'd rather be with the witnesses, that is." But again she said, "Oh, no," and then with an effort, "Oughtn't I to go into the court now if it's likely to be so full?" "Don't you worry," he said kindly. "I'll see you get a proper place. I must leave you now for a minute, but I'll come back in good time and look after you." She raised a thick veil she had pulled down over her face while they were going through that sinister, wolfish-looking crowd outside, and looked about her. Many of the gentlemen, they mostly wore tall hats and good overcoats, standing round and about her looked vaguely familiar. She picked out one at once. He was a famous journalist whose shrewd, animated face was familiar to her owing to the fact that it was widely advertised in connection with the preparation for the hair, the preparation which in happier, more prosperous days Bunting had had great faith in, and used, or so he always said, with great benefit to himself. This gentleman was the center of an eager circle. Half a dozen men were talking to him, listening deferentially when he spoke, and each of these men, so Mrs. Bunting realized, was a somebody. How strange, how amazing to reflect that from all parts of London, from their doubtless important avocations, one unseen, mysterious beckoner had brought all these men here together, to this sordid place on this bitterly cold, dreary day. Here they were, all thinking of, talking of, evoking one unknown, mysterious personality, that of the shadowy and yet terribly real human being who chose to call himself the Avenger. And somewhere, not so very far away from them all, the Avenger was keeping these clever, astute, highly trained minds, aye, and bodies too, at bay. Even Mrs. Bunting, sitting here unnoticed, realized the irony of her presence among them. End of Chapter 18. Recording by Leanne Howlett. The Lodger by Marie Belloc Lowndes. Chapter 19. It seemed to Mrs. Bunting that she had been sitting there a long time. It was really about a quarter of an hour, when her official friend came back. "Better come along now," he whispered. "It'll begin soon." She followed him out into a passage, up a row of steep stone steps, and so into the coroner's court. The court was big, well-lighted room, in some ways not unlike a chapel, the more so that a kind of gallery ran halfway round, a gallery evidently set aside for the general public, for it was now crammed to its utmost capacity. Mrs. Bunting glanced timidly towards the serried row of faces. Had it not been for her good fortune in meeting the man she was now following, it was there that she would have had to try and make her way, and she would have failed. Those people had rushed in the moment the doors were opened, pushing, fighting their way in a way she could never have pushed or fought. There were just a few women among them, set, determined-looking women, belonging to every class, but made one by their love of sensation and their power of forcing their way in where they wanted to be. But the women were few. The great majority of those standing there were men, men who were also representative of every class of Londoner. The center of the court was like an arena. It was sunk 2 or 3 steps below the surrounding gallery. Just now it was comparatively clear of people, save for the benches on which sat the men who were to compose the jury. Some way from these men, huddled together in a kind of big pew, stood 7 people, 3 women and 4 men. "Do you see the witnesses?" whispered the inspector, pointing these out to her. He supposed her to know one of them with familiar knowledge, but if that were so, she made no sign. Between the windows, facing the whole room, was a kind of little platform, on which stood a desk and an armchair. Mrs. Bunting guessed rightly that it was there the coroner would sit, and to the left of the platform was the witness stand, also raised considerably above the jury. Amazingly different, and far, far more grim and awe-inspiring than the scene of the inquest which had taken place so long ago on that bright April day in the village inn. There the coroner had sat on the same level as the jury, and the witnesses had simply stepped forward one by one and taken their place before him. Looking round her fearfully, Mrs. Bunting thought she would surely die if ever she were exposed to the ordeal of standing in that curious box-like stand, and she stared across at the bench where sat the 7 witnesses with a feeling of sincere pity in her heart. But even she soon realized that her pity was wasted. Each woman witness looked eager, excited, and animated, well pleased to be the center of attention and attraction to the general public. It was plain each was enjoying her part of important, if humble, actress in the thrilling drama which was now absorbing the attention of all London. It might almost be said of the whole world. Looking at these women, Mrs. Bunting wondered vaguely which was which. Was it that rather draggle-tailed-looking young person who had certainly, or almost certainly, seen the Avenger within 10 seconds of the double crime being committed? The woman who, aroused by one of his victims' cry of terror, had rushed to her window and seen the murderer's shadowy form pass swiftly by in the fog. Yet another woman, so Mrs. Bunting now remembered, had given a most circumstantial account of what the Avenger looked like, for he, it was supposed, had actually brushed by her as he passed. Those 2 women now before her had been interrogated and cross-examined again and again, not only by the police, but by representatives of every newspaper in London. It was from what they had both said, unluckily their accounts materially differed, that official description of the Avenger had been worked up, that which described him as being a good-looking, respectable young fellow of 28, carrying a newspaper parcel. As for the third woman, she was doubtless an acquaintance, a boon companion of the dead. Mrs. Bunting looked away from the witnesses and focused her gaze on another unfamiliar sight. Specially prominent, running indeed through the whole length of the shut-in space, that is, from the coroner's high dais right across to the opening in the wooden barrier, was an ink-splashed table at which, when she had first taken her place, there had been sitting 3 men busily sketching. But now every seat at the table was occupied by tired, intelligent-looking men, each with a notebook or with some loose sheets of paper before him. "Them's the reporters," whispered her friend. "They don't like coming till the last minute, for they has to be the last to go. At an ordinary inquest there are only 2, maybe 3 attending, but now every paper in the kingdom is pretty well applied for a pass to that reporter's table." He looked consideringly down into the well of the court. "Now let me see what I can do for you." Then he beckoned to the coroner's officer. "Perhaps you could put this lady just over there, in a corner by herself. Related to a relation of the deceased, but doesn't want to be." He whispered a word or two, and the other nodded sympathetically and looked at Mrs. Bunting with interest. "I'll put her just here," he muttered. "There's no one coming there today. You see, there are only 7 witnesses. Sometimes we have a lot more than that." And he kindly put her on a now empty bench opposite to where the 7 witnesses stood and sat with their eager, set faces, ready, aye, more than ready, to play their part. For a moment every eye in the court was focused on Mrs. Bunting, but soon those who had stared so hungrily, so intently at her, realized that she had nothing to do with the case. She was evidently there as a spectator, and more fortunate than most, she had a friend at court, and so was able to sit comfortably instead of having to stand in the crowd. But she was not long left in isolation. Very soon some of the important-looking gentlemen she had seen downstairs came into the court, and were ushered over to her seat, while 2 or 3 among them, including the famous writer whose face was so familiar that it almost seemed to Mrs. Bunting like that of a kindly acquaintance, were accommodated at the reporter's table. "Gentlemen, the coroner." The jury stood up, shuffling their feet, and then sat down again. Over the spectators there fell a sudden silence. And then what immediately followed recalled to Mrs. Bunting, for the first time, that informal little country inquest of long ago. First came the "Oyez, oyez," the old Norman French summons to all whose business it is to attend a solemn inquiry into the death, sudden, unexplained, terrible, of a fellow being. The jury, there were 14 of them, all stood up again. They raised their hands and solemnly chanted together the curious words of their oath. Then came a quick, informal exchange of sentences twixt the coroner and his officer. Yes, everything was in order. The jury had viewed the bodies. He quickly corrected himself. The body, for technically speaking, the inquest just about to be held only concerned one body. And then, amid a silence so absolute that the slightest rustle could be heard through the court, the coroner, a clever-looking gentleman, though not so old as Mrs. Bunting thought he ought to have been to occupy so important a position on so important a day, gave a little history, as it were, of the terrible and mysterious Avenger crimes. He spoke very clearly, warming to his work as he went on. He told them that he had been present at the inquest held on one of the Avenger's former victims. "I only went through professional curiosity," he threw in by way of parenthesis, "little thinking, gentlemen, that the inquest on one of these unhappy creatures would ever be held in my court." On and on he went, though he had in truth but little to say, and though that little was known to every one of his listeners. Mrs. Bunting heard one of the older gentlemen sitting near her whisper to another, "Drawing it out all he can, that's what he's doing, having the time of his life evidently." And then the other whispered back, so low that she could only just catch the words, "Aye, aye, but he's a good chap. I knew his father. We were at school together. Takes his job very seriously, you know. He does today, at any rate." She was listening intently, waiting for a word, a sentence which would relieve her hidden terrors, or on the other hand confirm them. But the word, the sentence, was never uttered. And yet, at the very end of his long peroration, the coroner did throw out a hint which might mean anything, or nothing. "I am glad to say that we hope to obtain such evidence today as will in time lead to the apprehension of the miscreant who has committed and is still committing these terrible crimes." Mrs. Bunting stared uneasily up into the coroner's firm, determined-looking face. What did he mean by that? Was there any new evidence? evidence of which Joe Chandler, for instance, was ignorant. And, as if in answer to the unspoken question, her heart gave a sudden leap, for a big burly man had taken his place in the witness box, a policeman who had not been sitting with the other witnesses. But soon her uneasy terror became stilled. This witness was simply the constable who had found the first body. In quick, business-like tones he described exactly what had happened to him on that cold, foggy morning 10 days ago. He was shown a plan, and he marked it slowly, carefully, with a thick finger. That was the exact place. No, he was making a mistake. That was the place where the other body had lain. He explained apologetically that he had got rather mixed up between the two bodies, that of Johanna Cobbett and Sophie Hurdle. And then the coroner intervened authoritatively. For the purpose of this inquiry, he said, we must, I think, for a moment consider the two murders together. After that the witness went on far more comfortably, and as he proceeded in a quick monotone, the full and deadly horror of the avenger's acts came over Mrs. Bunting in a great seething flood of sick fear and yes, remorse. Up to now she had given very little thought, if indeed any thought, to the drink-sodden victims of the avenger. It was he who had filled her thoughts, he and those who were trying to track him down. But now she felt sick and sorry she had come here today. She wondered if she would ever be able to get the vision the policeman's words had conjured up out of her mind, out of her memory. And then there came an eager stir of excitement and of attention throughout the whole court, for the policeman had stepped down out of the witness box, and one of the women witnesses was being conducted to his place. Mrs. Bunting looked with interest and sympathy at the woman, remembering how she herself had trembled with fear, trembled as that poor, bedraggled, common-looking person was trembling now. The woman had looked so cheerful, so well pleased with herself till a minute ago, but now she had become very pale, and she looked round her as a hunted animal might have done. But the coroner was very kind, very soothing and gentle in his manner, just as that other coroner had been when dealing with Ellen Green at the inquest on that poor drowned girl. After the witness had repeated in a toneless voice the solemn words of the oath, she began to be taken step by step through her story. At once Mrs. Bunting realized that this was the woman who claimed to have seen the avenger from her bedroom window. Gaining confidence as she went on, the witness described how she had heard a long-drawn, stifled screech, and, aroused from deep sleep, had instinctively jumped out of bed and rushed to her window. The coroner looked down at something lying on his desk. "Let me see. Here is the plan. Yes, I think I understand that the house in which you are lodging exactly faces the alley where the two crimes were committed." And there arose a quick, futile discussion. The house did not face the alley, but the window of the witness's bedroom faced the alley. "A distinction without a difference," said the coroner testily. "And now tell us as clearly and as quickly as you can what you saw when you looked out." There fell a dead silence on the crowded court, and then the woman broke out, speaking more volubly and firmly than she had yet done. "I saw him," she cried. "I shall never forget it. No, not till my dying day." And she looked round defiantly. Mrs. Bunting suddenly remembered a chat one of the newspaper men had had with a person who slept under this woman's room. That person had unkindly said she felt sure that Lizzie Cole had not got up that night, that she had made up the whole story. She, the speaker, slept lightly, and that night had been tending a sick child. Accordingly, she would have heard if there had been either the scream described by Lizzie Cole or the sound of Lizzie Cole jumping out of bed. "We quite understand that you think you saw the coroner hesitated, "the individual who had just perpetrated these terrible crimes. But what we want to have from you is a description of him. In spite of the foggy atmosphere about which all were agreed, you say you saw him distinctly, walking along for some yards below your window. Now please try and tell us what he was like." The woman began twisting and untwisting the corner of a colored handkerchief she held in her hand. "Let us begin at the beginning," said the coroner patiently. "What sort of a hat was this man wearing when you saw him hurrying from the passage?" "It was just a black hat," said the witness at last in a husky, rather anxious tone. "Yes, just a black hat." "And a coat? Were you able to see what sort of a coat he was wearing?" "He hadn't got no coat," she said decidedly. "No coat at all. I remembers that very particularly. I thought it queer as it was so cold. Everybody as can wears some sort of coat this weather. A juryman who had been looking at a strip of newspaper and apparently not attending at all to what the witness was saying, here jumped up and put out his hand. "Yes," the coroner turned to him, "I just want to say that this 'ere witness, if her name is Lizzie Cole, began by saying the Avenger was wearing a coat, a big heavy coat. I've got it here in this bit of paper." "I never said so," cried the woman passionately. "I was made to say all those things by the young man what came to me from the Evening Sun. Just put in what he liked in his paper, he did, not what I said at all." At this there was some laughter, quickly suppressed. "In future," said the coroner severely, addressing the juryman, who had now sat down again, "you must ask any question you wish to ask through your foreman, and please wait till I have concluded my examination of the witness." But this interruption, this accusation had utterly upset the witness. She began contradicting herself hopelessly. The man she had seen hurrying by in the semi-darkness below was tall. No, he was short. He was thin. No, he was a stoutish young man. And as to whether he was carrying anything, there was quite an acrimonious discussion. Most positively, most confidently, the witness declared that she had seen a newspaper parcel under his arm. It had bulged out at the back, so she declared. But it was proved, very gently and firmly, that she had said nothing of the kind to the gentleman from Scotland Yard who had taken down her first account. In fact, to him she had declared confidently that the man had carried nothing, nothing at all, that she had seen his arms swinging up and down. One fact, if fact it could be called, the coroner did elicit. Lizzie Cole suddenly volunteered the statement that as he had passed her window he had looked up at her. This was quite a new statement. "He looked up at you," repeated the coroner. "You said nothing of that in your examination." "I said nothing because I was scared, nigh scared to death. If you could really see his countenance, for we know the night was dark and foggy, will you please tell me what he was like?" But the coroner was speaking casually, his hand straying over his desk. Not a creature in that court now believed the woman's story. "Dark," she answered dramatically. "Dark, almost black, if you can take my meaning, with a sort of nigger look." And then there was a titter. Even the jury smiled, and sharply the coroner bade Lizzie Cole stand down. Far more credence was given to the evidence of the next witness. This was an older, quieter-looking woman, decently dressed in black. Being the wife of a night watchman whose work lay in a big warehouse situated about 100 yards from the alley or passage where the crimes had taken place, she had gone out to take her husband some food he always had at 1 in the morning. And a man had passed her, breathing hard and walking very quickly. Her attention had been drawn to him because she very seldom met anyone at that hour, and because he had such an odd, peculiar look and manner. Mrs. Bunting, listening attentively, realized that it was very much from what this witness had said that the official description of the Avenger had been composed, that description which had brought such comfort to her, Ellen Bunting's soul. This witness spoke quietly, confidently, and her account of the newspaper parcel the man was carrying was perfectly clear and positive. It was a neat parcel, she said, done up with string. She had thought it an odd thing for a respectably dressed young man to carry such a parcel. That was what had made her notice it. But when pressed, she had to admit that it had been a very foggy night. So foggy that she herself had been afraid of losing her way, though every step was familiar. When the third woman went into the box, and with sighs and tears told of her acquaintance with one of the deceased, with Johanna Cobbett, there was a stir of sympathetic attention. But she had nothing to say throwing any light on the investigation, save that she admitted reluctantly that Annie would have been such a nice, respectable young woman if it hadn't been for the drink. Her examination was shortened as much as possible, and so was that of the next witness, the husband of Johanna Cobbett. He was a very respectable-looking man, a foreman in a big business house at Croydon. He seemed to feel his position most acutely. He hadn't seen his wife for 2 years. He hadn't had news of her for 6 months. Before she took to drink she had been an admirable wife, and yes, mother. Yet another painful few minutes to anyone who had a heart or imagination to understand was spent when the father of the murdered woman was in the box. He had had later news of his unfortunate daughter than her husband had had, but of course he could throw no light at all on her murder or murderer. A barman who had served both the women with drink just before the public house closed for the night was handled rather roughly. He had stepped with a jaunty air into the box and came out of it looking cast down, uneasy. And then there took place a very dramatic, because an utterly unexpected incident. It was one of which the evening papers made the utmost, much to Mrs. Bunting's indignation, but neither coroner nor jury, and they after all were the people who mattered, thought a great deal of it. There had come a pause in the proceedings. All 7 witnesses had been heard, and a gentleman near Mrs. Bunting whispered, "They are now going to call Dr. Gaunt. He's been in every big murder case for the last 30 years. He's sure to have something interesting to say. It was really to hear him I came." But before Dr. Gaunt had time even to get up from the seat with which he had been accommodated close to the coroner, there came a stir among the general public, or rather among those spectators who stood near the low wooden door which separated the official part of the court from the gallery. The coroner's officer, with an apologetic air, approached the coroner and handed him up an envelope. And again in an instant there fell absolute silence on the court. Looking rather annoyed, the coroner opened the envelope. He glanced down the sheet of notepaper it contained. Then he looked up. "Mr. Then he glanced down again. Mr. Is it Cannot?" he said doubtfully. "May come forward." There ran a titter through the spectators, and the coroner frowned. A neat, jaunty-looking old gentleman in a nice fur-lined overcoat with a fresh red face and white side whiskers was conducted from the place where he had been standing among the general public to the witness box. "This is somewhat out of order, Mr. Cannot," said the coroner severely. "You should have sent me this note before the proceedings began." "This gentleman," he said, addressing the jury, "informs me that he has something of the utmost importance to reveal in connection with our investigation." "I have remained silent. I have locked what I knew within my own breast," began Mr. Cannot in a quavering voice, "because I am so afraid of the press. I knew if I said anything, even to the police, that my house would be besieged by reporters and newspaper men. I have a delicate wife, Mr. Coroner. Such a state of things, the state of things I imagine, might cause her death. Indeed, I hope she will never read a report of these proceedings. Fortunately, she has an excellent trained nurse." "You will now take the oath," said the coroner sharply. He already regretted having allowed this absurd person to have his say. Mr. Cannot took the oath with a gravity and decorum which had been lacking in most of those who had preceded him. "I will address myself to the jury," he began. "You will do nothing of the sort," broke in the coroner. "Now please attend to me. You assert in your letter that you know who is the avenger," put in Mr. Cannot promptly, "the perpetrator of these crimes. You further declare that you met him on the very night he committed the murder we are now investigating." "I do so declare," said Mr. Cannot confidently, "though in the best of health myself." He beamed round the court, a now amused, attentive court. "It is my fate to be surrounded by sick people, to have only ailing friends. I have to trouble you with my private affairs, Mr. Coroner, in order to explain why I happen to be out at so undue an hour as 1 o'clock in the morning." Again a titter ran through the court. Even the jury broke into broad smiles. "Yes," went on the witness solemnly, "I was with a sick friend, in fact, I may say a dying friend, for since then he has passed away. I will not reveal my exact dwelling place. You, sir, have it on my notepaper. It is not necessary to reveal it, but you will understand me when I say that in order to come home I had to pass through a portion of the Regent's Park, and it was there, to be exact, about the middle of Prince's Terrace, when a very peculiar-looking individual stopped and accosted me." Mrs. Bunting's hand shot up to her breast. A feeling of deadly fear took possession of her. "I mustn't faint," she said to herself hurriedly. "I mustn't faint. Whatever's the matter with me?" She took out her bottle of smelling salts and gave it a good long sniff. He was a grim, gaunt man, was this stranger, Mr. Coroner, with a very odd-looking face. I should say an educated man. In common parlance, a gentleman. What drew my special attention to him was that he was talking aloud to himself. In fact, he seemed to be repeating poetry. I give you my word, I had no thought of the avenger, no thought at all. To tell you the truth, I thought this gentleman was a poor escaped lunatic, a man who'd got away from his keeper. The Regent's Park, sir, as I need hardly tell you, is a most quiet and soothing neighborhood." And then a member of the general public gave a loud guffaw. "I appeal to you, sir," the old gentleman suddenly cried out, "to protect me from this unseemly levity. I have not come here with any other object than that of doing my duty as a citizen." "I must ask you to keep to what is strictly relevant," said the coroner stiffly. "Time is going on, and I have another important witness to call, a medical witness. Kindly tell me as shortly as possible what made you suppose that this stranger could possibly be—" With an effort he brought out for the first time since the proceedings began the words, "the Avenger." "I am coming to that," said Mr. Cannot hastily. "I am coming to that. Bear with me a little longer, Mr. Coroner. It was a foggy night, but not as foggy as it became later, and just when we were passing one another, I and this man who was talking aloud to himself, he, instead of going on, stopped and turned towards me. That made me feel queer and uncomfortable, the more so that there was a very wild, mad look on his face. I said to him as soothingly as possible, 'A very foggy night, sir,' and he said, 'Yes, yes, it is a foggy night, a night fit for the commission of dark and salutary deeds.' A very strange phrase, sir, that, dark and salutary deeds." He looked at the coroner expectantly. "Well, well, Mr. Cannot, was that all? Did you see this person go off in the direction of King's Cross, for instance?" "No." Mr. Cannot reluctantly shook his head. "No, I must honestly say I did not. He walked along a certain way by my side, and then he crossed the road and was lost in the fog." "That will do," said the coroner. He spoke more kindly. "I thank you, Mr. Cannot, for coming here and giving us what you evidently consider important information." Mr. Cannot bowed, a funny little old-fashioned bow, and again some of those present tittered rather foolishly. As he was stepping down from the witness box, he turned and looked up at the coroner, opening his lips as he did so. There was a murmur of talking going on, but Mrs. Bunting, at any rate, heard quite distinctly what it was that he said. "One thing I have forgotten, sir, which may be of importance. The man carried a bag, a rather light-colored leather bag, in his left hand. It was such a bag, sir, as might well contain a long-handled knife." Mrs. Bunting looked at the reporter's table. She remembered suddenly that she had told Bunting about the disappearance of Mr. Sleuth's bag, and then a feeling of intense thankfulness came over her. Not a single reporter at the long, ink-stained table had put down that last remark of Mr. Cannot. In fact, not one of them had heard it. Again the last witness put up his hand to command attention, and then silence did fall on the court. "One word more," he said in a quavering voice. "May I ask to be accommodated with a seat for the rest of the proceedings? I see there is some room left on the witness's bench." And without waiting for permission, he nimbly stepped across and sat down. Mrs. Bunting looked up, startled. Her friend the inspector was bending over her. "Perhaps you'd like to come along now," he said urgently. "I don't suppose you want to hear the medical evidence. It's always painful for a female to hear that, and there will be an awful rush when the inquest's over. I could get you away quietly now." She rose, and pulling her veil down over her pale face, followed him obediently. Down the stone staircase they went, and through the big, now empty room downstairs. "I'll let you out the back way," he said. "I expect you're tired, ma'am, and will like to get home to a cup of tea." "I don't know how to thank you." There were tears in her eyes. She was trembling with excitement and emotion. "You have been good to me." "Oh, that's nothing," he said a little awkwardly. "I expect you went through a pretty bad time, didn't you?" "Will they be having that old gentleman again?" She spoke in a whisper, and looked up at him with a pleading, agonized look. "Good Lord, no. Crazy old fool. We're troubled with a lot of those sort of people, you know, ma'am, and they often do have funny names, too. You see, that sort is busy all their lives in the city or what not. Then they retires when they gets about 60, and they're fit to hang themselves with dullness. Why, there's hundreds of loonies of the sort to be met in London. You can't go about at night and not meet 'em, plenty of 'em." "Then you don't think there was anything in what he said?" she ventured. "In what that old gent said? Goodness, no," he laughed good-naturedly. "But I'll tell you what I do think. If it wasn't for the time that had gone by, I should believe that the second witness had seen that crafty devil." He lowered his voice. "But there, Dr. Gaunt declares most positively, so did two other medical gentlemen, that the poor creatures had been dead hours when they were found." Medical gentlemen are always very positive about their evidence. They have to be, otherwise who'd believe 'em? If we'd time, I could tell you of a case in which, well, 'twas all because of Dr. Gaunt that the murderer escaped. We all knew perfectly well the man we caught did it, but he was able to prove an alibi as to the time Dr. Gaunt said the poor soul was killed. End of chapter 19. Recording by Leanne Howlett.